Welcome back. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Zoe Grunewald. And joining me now is Clive Lewis, MP for Norwich South, a former Shadow Secretary of State and a long-time progressive voice in Parliament. Clive, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hiya there, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Let's get straight into it because I know we don't have an awful lot of time with you. I want to talk first about the news that seems to be just constantly cycling with the rise of reform, which is one Reform MP saying something problematic or producing problematic policy. And this week, I think we plumbed new depths when Reform MP Sarah Pochin said she got into hot water for saying it drives her mad when she sees adverts full of black people, full of Asian people. I mean, you've spoken a lot about the kind of mainstreaming of racism, and you've spoken about potentially the role your party has had in this. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, Sarah Pochin hasn't said that in isolation. And look, what she's saying would have been very much at home inside the would be at home inside what we consider to be the BNP, the British National Party, an openly fascist entity. And her views and what she's expressed are views which have long been around in this country. They've just been papered over for a variety of reasons. But she now feels brave enough, confident enough, as do many others. We know the incidents of, Islamophobic attacks, including rapes, including, violent attacks, the attempts on burning down asylum hotels, the protests, the violent part of the protests at least, are connected to a deep structural racism in this country. And she is simply now feels emboldened enough, as do all those other people who've been committing those other attacks and crimes, to now come forward and openly act like this. We've seen a massive increase and surge in the number of black and ethnic minority nurses who are facing racism every day. It's so there's a permission that's been given, I think, is the best way to describe this. And she's saying what she's probably thought for a long time. You're asking me, do I think that the Labour government have, and whilst it was in opposition, have played their role in mainstreaming this? Without doubt. Without doubt. I mean, it just look at the language coming out of the Labour Party. Look at the talk about potentially, if not amending the Human Rights Act and the EHCR, our membership of it, and amending that. Talk about, just not just the rhetoric, but actually, Keir Starmer's speech, a nation of strangers, his social media output. It has mainstreamed racism. It's enabled the far right to go further and further. And I think it's anyone that understands, a basic understanding of what racism is and how deep it goes in this country structurally, would probably identify and understand that.
You spoke about the government talking about amending the ECHR, and yesterday a vote was held on Farage's 10-minute rule motion to withdraw the UK entirely from the ECHR, which is the European Convention on Human Rights. Only 61 Labour MPs voted against this, and you weren't one of them. Why did you not vote against it?
Because I was attending a conference in Europe with other social democrats on basically strategies for confronting the far right across Europe. Quite appropriate given what Nigel Farage was attempting to do. So I was slipped from Parliament. If I was there, I probably would have voted against it. Look, a 10-minute rule bill isn't going to become legislation. But I think we're in a period of politics where subtlety doesn't work, unfortunately. So the kind of, well, this is the 10-minute rule bill. It doesn't really... People need to see, I think at the moment, politics needs to be painted in bright, vivid colours. People need to know where you stand. Subtlety, unfortunately, we can wish it back, at the moment has gone, and politics is becoming more polarized. Now, I'm not saying we buy into that polarization, but quite clearly, when certain fundamental principles like human rights, which I consider to be a fundamental principle, is under attack by a person who's leading the most far right-wing authoritarian party in this country's history, who is likely to be the next prime minister as things stand in the polls, then I think it's important that a government that says it stands for certain things stands up for those things really clearly, unequivocally. The Labour government and the whips were in complete and utter confusion yesterday, just looking at my WhatsApps from colleagues. The front bench were being told to abstain. Backbenchers were being told that They could do what they wanted to do. Then the text was saying that they too were abstaining. It was a mess. Not the kind of bold, vivid, cutters, this is where we stand, this is what we think that you want from a government. And I think, look, I think that's what, Labour MPs, Labour members and the country are crying out for. They're crying out for strong, effective leadership. Who will stand up to Nigel Farage, Robert Jenrick, and the hate that they are spewing? We want someone that will stand up and speak for us. Keir Starmer's missing in action, as is most of the front bench, I'm afraid to say. In fact, if you look at their conduct, you look at the language, you look at the tone, you look at the policies in the first 15 months, they've been going the other direction. So I'm not surprised it was a mess. But I do know, thankfully, there were 62 colleagues who understood what was going on and made a definitive case for human rights. I applaud them, and I'm sure there were many more. They just needed a little bit of leadership that was lacking yesterday in that vote.
Clive, I'm going to bring in my colleague Harry now, who is standing in for my other colleague Ali today. Harry.
Hi, Clive. Harry from the News.
Hi, Harry.
Here. Hope you're well. I wanted to sort of touch on your first point that you made about Sarah Potchin's comments and about how Keir Starmer, in your view, has been complicit in shifting the Overton window in terms of enabling this sort of very insensitive, racialised discourse. He did come out, finally, in his speech at Labour Party conference and tried to define the line between patriotic sentiment and nationalistic exclusionary politics. Do you think that was a bit too little, too late in coming with that dividing line?
Look, it's a good question. About 4 years ago, it was a front page in The Guardian, and I wrote an article. My article wasn't front page, but there was a front page about the issue I'm going to talk about. And I was asked to write an article, an editorial, an opinion piece. And it was about the news that the front bench under Keir Starmer was going to start adopting the Union Jack and standing in front of it and using it in its comms and so on. And I was one of those who said, well, hold on a second. The flag means different things to different people. And whilst it is our national symbol, and whilst there is a lot to be proud about, if you think about what the athletes, what the England team, although that's England, if we kind of expand that to the United Kingdom, naughty of me, I know, but just bear with me for a second. What we've seen over the last kind of 10 or 15 years or so is in terms of the Olympics, in terms of athletics, sporting events, cultural events, we've seen people begin to bring back to the mainstream, the main public, this sense that the flag is ours, that it can be a positive symbol. And that's something that I really, really think is important, that we shouldn't just leave it to the far right. We shouldn't just leave it to the nationalists. And by that, I mean negative nationalists. It's something that we should all embrace. Unfortunately, that takes quite a bit of work because the Union Jack and any flag is a shorthand for a variety of views, of histories, of the way that we look at our society. And it means different things, different people. And if you're going to use that as a shorthand, you jolly well need to explain what that means. You need to have thought it through and you need to have engaged with people. There was none of that when Keir Starmer and the front bench decided they were suddenly, literally overnight, going to start standing in front of the Union Jack. No conversations, no deeper narratives, no conversations about, our place in history, empire, the story of this country, which includes empire, which hasn't been airbrushed out in all its glory and its darkness. None of that was there. And it was a problem waiting to happen. And, now we find ourselves 4 years later where Keir Starmer, months after having repeated key lines from Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, finds himself having to defend, having to say, I want a form of patriotic, I'm going to try and explain what patriotic nationalism is. We've had 4 years to do that. We should have been doing that. We haven't explained what that looks like. And I just feel that this kind of, in many ways, sums up Keir Starmer. It's a criminal thoughtlessness. There is the only thing I know Keir Starmer stands for is smashing anything to the left of him and Morgan McSweeney. That's literally their project, smashing the left inside the Labour Party. So much so that coming into government, they've gone, we've got some missions. They've gone to the dogs. What do we have? Oh, growth. We'll have growth. Well, how's that going? I mean, this project is embarrassing. It isn't something I can call it a project. And now to suddenly start going, oh my God, there are racists out there. Well, what do we do? I mean, no, this is not grown-up politics. These are not the adults. And it's shocking to people. No wonder we are now polling equal with the Liberal Democrats. I mean, it's just amazing. And it makes me deeply despondent. There is a way out of this, clearly. I don't think it involves Keir Starmer and the people around him. But hey, I'm already on record as saying that. It's not news. I wish a few more would say it.
Clive, I interviewed you a few years ago when Rishi Sunak was still Prime Minister, and you were kind of slightly warning about some of these things back then. I think you were saying you were worried that that democracy within the party was being challenged. You were worried that progressive voices weren't being heard. Today, you're obviously, those thoughts are still there and with a lot more kind of passion behind them. Are you fearful that if you continue saying these things, you could get kicked out of the party? Or do you think there is a rising tide of discontent? And you were just saying then you think, Starmer cannot lead this Labour government into the next election. What do you see happening to the party?
I mean, I do feel a bit of a Cassandra, the Trojan princess constantly warning of doom and gloom. But it's not because I'm trying. I wanted to believe, when we had that massive mandate, the landslide victory, I wanted to believe that the worst instincts that I had seen over the last, the 5 years beforehand it was gonna be different in government. And you owe it to your party, your government, your members, your voters, the people who voted for that government to support it where you can. It's why, I didn't rebel on the King's speech, as some of my colleagues did. I thought, no matter how much I would like the two-child policy, overturned, I had to give my colleagues, the people who had won that election on their terms, I had to give them my support, because that's what it warranted. But within 15 months, I don't think I'm alone in thinking that support was not in error, but it hasn't been fulfilled. They haven't deserved it. They've squandered it, for want of a better term. And the reason I was warning of this, however many years ago we were meeting, was because Mayor Angelou, the Mayor Angelou quote: when someone shows you themselves, believe them. And I think Michael Crick also was screaming at people. He was screaming into the void, and he was saying, look at what's happening inside the Labour Party. I know they've defeated Corbyn. I know many people are happy with that. Many Conservatives, many people in the centre ground of British politics are over the moon with that. But look at what they're doing. Look at how they're running their selections in one of the most corrupt and sectarian ways we've seen. This is Michael Crick. He isn't a socialist by any stretch of the imagination. Look at the way that party democracy is being smashed in the name of winning an election victory, in the name of discipline. Look at what's happening inside the Labour Party. Lift up the bonnet. But no one wanted to listen because people were too worried about, how do we get rid of the Tories? How do we get rid of Boris Johnson? How do we get Liz Truss? How do we get rid of Rishi Sunak? How do we end this 14-year nightmare and bring in something competent and capable? Well, I get it, and people didn't want to look too closely under the bonnet. Well, now you've bought the car, buyer beware. We've lifted up the bonnet and found it's not that much underneath the bonnet, and what is there is kind of falling apart and collapsing as we speak. So, yes, I did warn about those things, because you can't say, this is who I am, these are my 10 pledges, this is the kind of party I want, and then over a period of years completely shift in a way that no Labour leader has, not even Tony Blair. Tony Blair brought people with him. He brought the left, he brought the unions, the soft left with him. Keir hasn't done that. Morgan McSweeney hasn't done that. They've simply told a story, I'm afraid to say a series of lies, hoodwinked people, and then moved to a completely different position. And now people are having buyer's remorse, frankly. But it was all there to be able to see under the bonnet, if you wanted to look, in the way they were behaving with members, in the way they were behaving on selections, in the way that they've been dealing with journalists that I know. It's all been there, and it was all there to see if you chose to see it. And now people can see it. Unfortunately, that's with hindsight.
Clive, I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier. If you believe that Keir Starmer isn't the person to lead the Labour Party and the Britain that you would like to see, Who do you think can?
I think that's a really tough question. I think, and the reason it's a tough question is because I think one of the people who has the best chance of turning this kind of chaos, frankly, or this listing boat around, is the mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham. I think he has real potential. I am not alone in thinking that. And look, I understand. There is a danger of, I know he's the Messiah. I get that, the king over the water and so on and so forth. But I think if you listen to what Andy's been saying, he did his book launch, he's kind of been talking about, the things he's learned, his vision for the good society, the things that he's talking about, the cultural changes within the Labour Party, acknowledging that there's a home for the left and the right inside of our party, that our party should be democratic, that we should be looking at the constitution, we should be looking at the voting system, that it shouldn't just be a case of trickle down, there should be redistribution, not just of wealth, but of power, pushing it down, the things he's learned as a mayor. This is what people were voting for when they voted Labour, in my opinion. People voted for very different reasons, but some of that, it's not what you would call hard left radicalism, but it is a kind of democratic, constitutional set of answers, economic answers, in the face of a rising tide of right-wing populism and authoritarianism, which talks about pushing power down to people, down to communities, not just devolution. I'm talking about wealth building. I'm talking about, a voting system that makes people feel they're empowered, about local government changes, look at what he's done on the buses. Look at what he's done in local government in Manchester. There is a template there. I think that's why there are so many people that think Andy Burnham is someone who could make a real difference in the 3 to 4 years that we have. But there are people who will do everything they can to ensure that he's never given that chance. And I guess that's the kind of the ongoing fight inside the Labour Party at the moment. Should our members, should this country have a choice as to who leads it? I don't necessarily think that most of the people on the cabinet at the moment are fit to run the country after Keir Starmer. Why? Because they've been part and parcel of one of the most disastrous first 15 months of a Labour government in its history. Why should they now be able to come out and say, well, I wanted to do it differently? Collective responsibility, I understand. But everyone, whether it was over Gaza, whether it was over winter fuel, whether it was over disability payments, could have fallen on their sword, like people like in the past, like Robin Cook, a man of deep integrity, who was like, no, I will give up my ministerial position, my position on the cabinet, for a fundamental principle. It is important that I do this. And he is remembered for that. Where are the Robin Cooks of this cabinet? I don't see them. And frankly, we need a Robin Cook type character to lead us out of this mess, to lead us out of this hole, and to potentially help us defeat reform at the next election. That's why they'll throw the kitchen sink at trying to stop him to come in. But I'm afraid to say, internally, it's also going to be difficult for him. So I'm under no illusions. But if I could rub a lamp and have a wish, my first wish would be for him to be back inside of Parliament.
And very final question from me, Clive, before we let you go. Obviously, Zach Polanski leading the Greens, they're on the up and up. We've seen in the by-election defeat in Carefully that the challenge for Labour is coming from the left as well. Would you ever consider defecting to the Greens?
Look, I'm a social democrat. I'm a democratic socialist. The Green Party is a very different kettle of fish. I think Zach Polanski is doing a fantastic job of articulating his politics and the politics of an increasingly large section of the Green Party. But you saw the difficulties he had inside his own in his leadership campaign and continues to have. The Green Party isn't homogenous. No political party is. He is one person, one spokesperson, and there's probably a fair few number of people inside the Green Party who support and share those politics. There are lots that don't, and so I guess the point I'm trying to make is, he's saying what I think a Labour government should be saying and doing. Not everything he's talking about. I mean, I wouldn't get caught up in the kind of angels on a head of a pin around NATO stuff, but he clearly feels that he has to kind of deal with that because of your party, or whatever your party currently is called, and their attacks on him or their comments on the Green Party. But I'm in the Labour Party. This is where, for me, the so-called class struggle is. This is at the forefront of parliamentary politics. I want to be there. If I'm thrown out, well, then everything's up in the air, and you look around and you see what you're going to do. I haven't been thrown out. I'm not walking away. I'm staying in the party to fight. If it gets to the point where I have no future inside that party, and that's made increasingly clear to me that I have no future inside that party, then you consider that. Well, and I don't know, but that's hypothetical. I am very happy being in the Labour Party. I've been in it all my adult life, more or less all my adult life. My dad was a trade unionist. My granddad was a trade unionist. It runs through my blood. I would only leave really under duress. So I get there's lots of speculation, but this is a Labour government. There's everything to fight for. I don't intend to kind of turn away and run around. I want to fight for a Labour government that changes my constituents' lives, changes this country for the better, and that's where the fight is at the moment inside this party to make it a genuinely progressive party.
Clive Lewis, thank you so much for joining us. That was Clive Lewis, MP for Norwich South, former Shadow Secretary of State and long-time progressive voice in Parliament.